Welcome to our session today. My name is Chrisa Papathanasiou, and I'm a team lead legal counsel at ECB Banking Supervision. I lead the supervisory cooperation team, which is entrusted with the cooperation among supervisors between the ECB and other authorities around the world. Today, we will walk through the world of Memoranda of Understanding. What is a Memorandum of Understanding? It is a non-binding arrangement, a gentleman's agreement. It is signed among authorities to exchange confidential information that serves the needs of exercising their tasks. But which type of information is considered confidential? It is confidential if the information is not public, it does not exist in the public arena, and there is an interest in maintaining the confidentiality. Entering into a memorandum of understanding with an authority from a third country is, of course, not an obligation. That means that the authorities enjoy discretion with entering in such arrangements with authorities from relevant third countries. A memorandum of understanding or any other form of arrangement is necessary in order to cooperate with authorities from other and especially from third countries. But what are the typical clauses in a memorandum of understanding? Let's take a closer look. A usual clause in a memorandum of understanding is that the arrangement aims at ensuring the effective exchange of information for the fulfillment of the authority's tasks. Another clause is that if a request for information is denied, the authority that denied providing the information shall provide the reasons for not sharing it. Typically, the authorities endeavor to preserve the confidentiality of the information received. Memoranda of Understanding often provide that all persons dealing with or having access to confidential information are bound by obligations of professional secrecy. And finally, the parties to a Memorandum of Understanding often agree that before disclosing confidential information to a third party, which was received from an authority which is a party to the Memorandum of Understanding, they will seek and obtain the consent of the originating authority. I will now give the floor to my colleague, Davide.
Thanks, Chrisa. My name is Davide Stroppa, and I am the team leader on equivalence at the European Banking Authority, the EBA. I coordinate the work on the assessment of third countries' regulatory and supervisory frameworks. As Chrisa was mentioning, one of the important prerequisites to sign MOUs is that confidential information needs to be protected. Within its activities over the past years, the EBA has conducted several assessments of the equivalence of confidentiality provision of non-EU authorities to facilitate their participation to European supervisory colleges and to support the signature of MOU. But what does it mean, equivalence? And what is the approach to assess whether a non-EU authority applies an equivalent framework? First of all, equivalence is not a line-by-line assessment, which means that it does not require an exact transposition of EU laws into another country's rulebook, but is based on a comparison between the guiding principles and the actual outcomes of the EU framework and those of the other country. Second, it is based on the provisions that are in place at the time of the assessment, rather than upcoming laws and regulation. Third, these laws and regulation should be enforceable, so not just the guidance, which means that if they are breached, then there should be a sanction. Fourth, the provisions should be included in domestic laws and regulations, rather just in specific bilateral arrangements. Finally, the assessments also consider the practical experience that the local authority has in enforcing those provisions. Let's now see the principles that are at the core of the assessment of the equivalence of confidentiality framework. In essence, the framework that is applicable to a non-EU authority is assessed as equivalent when it contains in its provision and in its practice the factors that are considered to be the key features of the framework that is applicable to EU authorities, as defined by a number of directives in the banking space, like the CRD, the Capital Requirement Directive. So the first principle or the first factor is the definition of confidential information. Here, the objective is to establish that there is a proper understanding of what is confidential and needs to be protected. In particular, as also Krisa was mentioning before, in the EU framework, confidential information is the information that has been received in the course of the supervisory work that is not in the public domain and is not in summary of an aggregate form so that the individual credit institution cannot be identified. Second principle is the obligation of confidentiality. Here, the objective is to establish that an ongoing obligation of professional secrecy is imposed on all the persons that work or have worked on behalf of the competent authority. Here, we look at two important features. The first one is the applicability. So professional secrecy obligation must apply to all persons working or who have worked for the competent authority, meaning not just the employees, but all the people that have worked there. Second is the duration of obligation. Professional secrecy obligation is applicable at all times while working or acting on behalf of the competent authority and then on ongoing basis thereafter, which means that the obligation does not stop when the employment or the contract ends. Third, the use of confidential information. Here, the objective is to establish that confidential information can only be used only for specific purposes which are related to the tasks of the competent and resolution authority. So it means that confidential information received by the authority should be used only in the course of its duties and only to perform supervisory tasks or impose penalty. Finally, the fourth principle is the restriction to disclosure. When we say that confidential information is confidential, we do not mean that it cannot never be disclosed. But the fact that confidential information that is received by a competent authority can be disclosed only in specific set of circumstances and to a specific set of subjects, except, of course, for the cases that are covered by criminal law. So here we look at the authorities and the subject to which confidential information can be disclosed and under which conditions. And one important condition is the principle of express and prior consent, so that if the authority receives the information from another authority and then it needs to disclose this information, before so it must obtain the consent from the authority that originally shared the information. So these were the principle for the equivalence of confidentiality framework. And this was it for today's recording. We hope you enjoyed and have increased also your knowledge on the MOUs and the equivalence of confidentiality provisions.